been really vocal about what I saw at the FDA. I mean, I've spoken to the Office of the Inspector General. You know, I've spoken to people over there, and I've talked to a lot of journalists about this. And so I just want people to be aware of what's going on. And
all right, let's do it.
Yeah. So FDA, one thing that's really interesting that I noticed from the Division of Psychiatry is that FDA is skewed towards drug development. There's something called the PDUFA, which is I guess a law that went through Congress, and it's where pharmaceutical industry fund a lot of the FDA. I can't remember the percentage, but I think it's got to be like 75%. But along with that money that FDA gets from pharma, you know, to hire the people to do the work, there's a lot of requirements. So FDA needs to, for instance, like when a drug company wants an approval, they'll put a whole dossier of clinical trials in, and they have to get it reviewed in 9 months, essentially. So because of the way the funding comes through, a lot of the resources in the FDA really focus on those activities. So instead of, say, maybe investigating some post-marketing safety incident and putting resources there, no, it's like, no, you know, we've got these timelines. We're going to focus on this company who's trying to get this drug on the market, and we're going to just focus on getting the review done in 9 months. And so that's kind of...
Do you think those timelines are intentional? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you think, for example, with vaccines, there's no vaccine and part of the childhood vaccine schedule that was ever studied for more than 3 days for the potential adverse events for more than 3 days? And I personally believe that that's intentional. So they can issue these reports, like you're saying, like there were no seizures, you know, during our, you know, post, you know, vaccination clinical trials, but they don't tell you that they only observed the recipients for 3 days. So do you think that the 9 months that you just mentioned, that the 9 months is intentionally in place because they knew if they followed these patients longer than 9 months, that they would see more adverse events or any reason to not market or pull the product?
Nicole, let me clarify. So the 9 months is the time it takes that the FDA has to review all of the research and give a decision. So there could be clinical trials in there that may have gone on for maybe even less than that, 3 months, you know, which is something that we should talk about, because I put a pin in that because I'm going to pick up a thread later on how long we study antidepressants and whether that's intentional, because I do think there's probably a relationship between the thinking that goes into that and what you mentioned about the vaccine. So I'm happy to discuss that link. So, but I guess the main point that I want to make about this is that FDA has timelines on doing activities that benefit pharma, essentially, because drug companies, they want to put their dossier in and they want the drug on the market in 9 months so they can maximize the profitability of the drug before the patent runs out. And while that seems like good business sense and like, hey, what's wrong with that? The consequences of that are that safety issues get neglected. For instance, the big one that we are looking at the moment is PSSD, which is persistent sexual dysfunction when people come off antidepressants. We had a citizens petition submitted by Dr. David Healy that went in 2018. FDA still hasn't responded to that. It's 2024, which is crazy because it's like, who are you working for, right? You know, if you're not working for the public that's putting in petitions to get safety information recognized and put on the labels, like they'll write back to pharma in 9 months, but if there's a safety issue like this, they'll ghost them for 6 years. Public Citizen is suing them at the moment, essentially to get the FDA to respond, which is absolutely crazy. And so all of these safety things that are going on, they don't really have timelines. And so that's one thing that was really messed up about the FDA. But the other thing is more subtle and more of a social thing. People that go into the FDA, gosh, I'm rambling, but I have so much to say here, so I'm just going to go for it. Yeah. People that go to the FDA, they come out of academic institutions. Most of the leaders of academic institutions are cozy with the pharmaceutical industry because they run the clinical trials. Because one of the best ways to get high-ranking academic posts is to do clinical research, and working with the pharmaceutical industry is how you do that, because they make it really easy for the professors. They fund them, they fly them around the place, they let them give talks, and it allows them to build up a very impressive resume of international exposure, and that's how you end up at the top. Now, because these leaders in these academic institutions work so much with the pharmaceutical industry, they form relationships and they end up biased towards drug industry points of views on drug side effects and such. And these are the professors that are training essentially all of the doctors. And so doctors go into FDA through out of their academic medical centers. Most of them have been trained by very friendly academics towards the drug industry. And then they're primed to essentially keep the status quo. My professor thought this about side effects. He thought they were always overblown. He thought people were mischaracterizing psychiatric drugs because they had, some beef about, just thinking that people didn't need them. And so they carry their prejudices in there, which really is the culture of academic medicine. And so they're biased. And I saw a tremendous amount of that. And you don't want to speak up, because when you do, it's like, hey guys, I think we got this thing wrong with this side effect or this thing on the drug label. Now I'm questioning the intellect and the decision making and the judgment of the other people in the organization. And I think this is just something really normal that I think most people will relate to if they've ever worked in a corporate environment. It's not always about the truth, and it's really is kind of about playing nice in the sandbox, and the exact same forces are at play in the FDA, and it shouldn't be, because when you just kind of go with the flow, now we're talking about public health and people getting hurt.
Right, but the difference is between law or science, where in the law, for example, we would be given hypotheticals and a set of facts, and then we would manipulate the facts and have debates and apply the law and come to different conclusions. That's the nature of the law. And when you're talking about science and medicine, we're talking about the scientific method, right? The purpose of it, my understanding is that's the point, right? You're supposed to have rigorous debate. And that's the quickest way to find the best solution to the problem, especially a new issue, for example, like a novel virus, for example, when no one knows, no one's seen it before. The best way to find what the appropriate response is by sharing information, sharing trial and error. So I understand what you're saying. Like if I sold, ink cartridges for printers, I get that corporate narrative, and I get that you're working in a corporation, but it's still very troubling when you're dealing in these types in these fields, science, law, medicine. This is exactly the type of discussion. These are the critical thinkers who challenge the narrative, are looking out in the best interest of their patients or their clients. Those are the ones that should actually be excelling and be rising to the top, not in a normal, in a whatever society used to be like that. Those are the types of individuals that you wanted to rise to the top, because those were the thought leaders who would be innovating and developing in a positive way. So I totally hear what you're saying, but it's very unnerving in our respective professions.
It's super unnerving. And I want to link back to something that you brought up before about the duration of clinical trials. Like, for instance, why isn't the FDA making drug companies study psychiatric medications for longer than 3 months? We know these are drugs that people become tolerant to. We know they're drugs that 1 in 8 people take, in the US for several years at a time. And there's absolutely no leadership there. And it's not like that's like the cap, because we study statins for high cholesterol. We put people in randomized controlled trials for 3 to 5 years. And so there's no leadership at the FDA saying, hey guys, we're going to make you guys do a 2-year clinical trial so we can really get to the bottom of what antidepressants are doing long term. And they don't do it essentially because of precedent. The first antidepressant came through with 3 months, and now I guess that decision, everyone just looks at that decision making and just says, okay, well, we did it that time, we did it that way, and so we're just going to go with that. And we don't want to say that, I guess, the old director of the division who said that was okay had poor judgment, and so they're just going with the flow. They're not really working with industry in a way that's making drugs safe. I think they're just doing what's easy for them.